Good afternoon. First of all, there are space here in front. If you guys don't stand in the back, come on, in front there are some space. It's a great pleasure to have today with us Professor Armstrong, director of the MIT Energy Initiatives and the Chevron Professor of Chemical Engineering. He has been a member of MIT faculty since 1973, I believe. And he's originally from the South, but he got a training in Wisconsin to get used to cold weather, so it could last in Boston. He served as the head of chemical engineering department from 96 to 2007. His research interests include polymer, fluid mechanics, rheology of complex materials, and energy. In 2008, he was elected to National Academy of Engineers for conducting outstanding research on non-Newtonian fluid mechanics and co-authoring the landmark textbooks and providing leadership in chemical engineering education. He also received the Warren Lewis Award and Professional Progress Award from AICHE, American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and also received in 2006 Wickham Medal from Society of Rheology. He has done a lot of work. I don't want to take a lot of time. So Professor Armstrong served as the Deputy Director of MIT Energy Initiatives and since its founding 6 years ago, and he has been really the guiding force in developments and success of MIT Energy Initiative. According to their president, he helped shape its transformation from a promising idea into a pioneer source of energy research, policy analysis, and education. That's something that all of us dream of, starting from idea going. He's an extraordinary example of the engineers which carry it all the way to the application and marketplace. Under his and Muniz, former director of MIT Energy Initiatives, they established Energy Miner in 2009. It's already one of the most popular miners at MIT, I heard. And this interdisciplinary program is the program we bring 5 different schools across MIT. He has been heavily involved in seed funding programs, and more than 100 MIT seed fund projects have been attracted many faculty from different areas at MIT to work on interdisciplinary program. Professor Armstrong maintained a strong relation also with the industry and the government and private sectors. More than 2/3 of the projects supported through these coalitions has been in low carbon research, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, and carbon management. The largest single area of the funded research has been in solar energy. And in addition to talking about the MIT initiative, he's going to share some of the experience in solar energy with us. He's going to talk about what should we expect from solar energy in the future. It's a great pleasure to introduce you Professor Bob Armstrong.
Thanks very much, Hamid, for that very kind introduction. You gave most of my talk there, going through what MIT did. So, as Hamid indicated, although the title of the talk that was published talks about the future of solar, what I'm going to talk about is split into 2 pieces. I'm going to spend the first part of this talk describing the MIT Energy Initiative. We picked that name for the acronym. So the MITEI, we pronounce MIGHTY. It's a great acronym to have. So I'm going to talk to you about MIGHTY and how we've structured ourselves and what the goals of MIGHTY are and sort of where we've come in the last 9 years or so since we got going. And then I'm going to spend the last part of the talk talking about solar and how we do solar in this cross-campus way. So how do we actually bring together disciplines across campus to do some messaging and understand the solar challenge that we have in front of us globally, and the issues in front of us to get there from where we are. So let me start with this overview or summary of the energy initiative at MIT, give you a sense of what we're about. We're a group that we have sort of as our mission statement, linking science, innovation, and policy together to transform the world's energy systems. And that's a statement that we believe that in order to make real headway at a global scale, you have to have these multiple disciplines together. All of them are important. None of them will get you there all by themselves, right? So I think that cross-campus linkage, and I've seen a lot of that today here in the discussions, is absolutely vital. So we launched at the end of 2006, really the beginning of 2007, as a campus-wide initiative. Our president at the time, Susan Hockfield, had as her vision bringing all 5 of MIT's schools together. We're a pretty good map to IIT, I think, except for law school. We have engineering, science, business, humanities, arts, and social sciences, and architecture and planning. Those are our 5 schools. Our charge was bring all of those talents together to address the world's big energy challenges. We're focused quite broadly in energy, so we look across energy from energy sources, how you produce those, how you convert them, how do you distribute them, transmit them, and eventually how do you use them, how do consumers and industry use those sources, and associated environmental challenges. So when we started back in 2006, we had 3 framing challenges: energy supply, energy security, and environment, climate change. And I think today, as we look at it, climate change is probably the biggest of those drivers by far. We have 3 objectives within the program, 3 themes that we work. One of those is research. I mean, that's obviously a big interest at MIT for us, our students, and our sponsors. Education, Hamid mentioned the energy minor that we've done, which, like everything we do at MIT, is couched in the framework of what can we do as an initiative that cuts across the campus. So the minor is something that every undergraduate at MIT can take. They all have the prereqs. And in fact, we've graduated students in the minor from every school at MIT. And then lastly, outreach. So how do we take what we learn about energy through our research and education programs and get that into the public debate? So how can we inform thought leaders, senior administration in Washington, members of Congress, their staff? How do we inform them about the issues in front of us and provide them with some of the basic knowledge they need to make wise decisions? And that's actually what leads to the solar study that I'll talk about in the latter part of the talk. So that's MIT. Give you a sense of what we've done in these really about 7, 8 years that we've been up and running. We spent the first year or 2 years just fundraising and getting members on board. But we've done some 800 plus research projects across all disciplines. That includes, as Hamid mentioned, a lot of seed fund projects. We've done 142 seed fund projects. It's a great way to get faculty involved in energy research. MIT, like I think most academic institutions around the country and the world, didn't have so many faculty focused on energy in 2005. For the simple reason that post-1984, when oil prices dropped, a lot of government research funding dried up, and faculty moved on to other areas that were much better funded. Nonetheless, there's a lot of talent out there, materials talent, systems talent, that we need to get involved in energy. So we've gotten about $18.5 million of research seed projects underway to get faculty involved in energy. Altogether, we engage in the energy initiative better than 30% of the faculty at MIT, so 310 out of 1,000 faculty on campus. We have, in addition to the industry-sponsored research programs, we have a number of large DOE research centers. We're part of two of the Energy Frontier Research Centers. Both of ours happen to focus on solar technologies. We're a core university partner in the DOE Nuclear Hub, doing nuclear simulation and modeling. I should say all three of those centers have renewed now. Lots of ARPA-E awards and so on. So we also have quite a few partnerships with governments around the world, ranging from India to Portugal, and we work closely with a number of the national labs, NREL and Argonne in particular. In that last group, I had a number of governments around the world we work with. We think it's really important to have a strong international outreach. After all of the energy demand growth going forward in the next 50, 100 years is going to come in the developing world. And so it's really important we figure out what their challenges are and how do we meet those challenges in an environmentally friendly way. Right? So how do we get them the right resources at the right price point? Probably the biggest single effort we have in that area is in India, the so-called Tata Center for Technology and Design, which is aimed at taking students from multiple schools. We have engineering is probably the largest school. We have science. We have business school students involved to look at the challenges in these developing countries and try to understand what are the constraints they face, what are the social needs that we might be able to meet with technology solutions. So how do you meet those needs in the face of economic constraints, policy constraints, supply chain constraints, lots of different constraints that face you. So how do you do good design to get at those problems in a way the local economy can absorb those technologies? We currently have, I'll come back to that one in a minute. We have programs with student groups interested in energy more broadly in developing countries. E4Dev is one of our student groups that working in Africa primarily. We have worked with France. We have one of their CNRS research centers in MITI. And in China, we're having an increasingly broadened engagement there. Our first Chinese member is China General Nuclear. The Tata Center is particularly interesting, as I said, because it goes after this region of the world where demand growth is going to happen, right? And one of my great fears and one of the things that keeps me up at night is what happens if, in order to fuel economic growth in India, they burn the coal they have, right, without emissions controls. Then I think we're in serious trouble globally. So how do we meet their needs for energy in a clean way? We have students working mostly on energy, but also in clean water technologies, in health technologies, and in food and agriculture technologies. And there's some interesting intersections there. At any one time, we have about 60 graduate students and postdocs working in that program. They all spend time on the ground in India trying to understand on the ground what the challenges are and what those markets look like so that they can address them back at campus. Some of the recent successes there include a new startup company by one of our graduate students, Katie Taylor, who developed an interesting application for solar, replacing diesel generation for pumping irrigation water. So she has a solar-powered irrigation pump, which is really helpful for rural agriculture in India. It avoids the problem of storage with solar because you can just pump water during the daytime. She had a chance to show that off to Prime Minister Modi when he was visiting the U.S. Back in September. Give you a sense of the breadth of the research we do. I've got 4 pie charts here, 2 on this slide, 2 on the next slide. And I'm going to go quickly over these. The whole point of this is to give you a sense that we're not focused in one specific area, but we're looking to see what our options are going to be for the future. So we're looking at many different technologies, many different system issues to understand how we might meet the energy challenges of the world as we get out to 2030, 2040, and beyond. So in the bottom left is an area we call innovation. The thesis of that area is that no matter what your favorite image of the long-term energy future is, we will be using current energy sources, fossil energy sources, for decades to come. The energy system is a system it's a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. It doesn't turn on a dime, much as you might like to make it do so, right? So given that we're going to be using those resources going forward, how do you do that as efficiently as possible and as environmentally responsibly as you can, right? So we get that energy with least damage and with most efficient process. So across there is work in energy efficiency broadly, beginning with hydrocarbon products and processing. How do you get those out of the ground as efficiently as you can? Electric power systems, nuclear, heat management, industry efficiencies, so broad sets of problems in those areas. Upper right looks at the longer term challenge. So where will we be in 2050 and beyond? What are those technologies? And that includes the group of renewable technologies we all think about. So solar, wind, geothermal, biomass conversion, wave, tidal, a whole suite, plus enabling technologies like new materials that are important for those technologies, systems, so understanding storage and the grid, and so on. Then we have two final categories that look in the upper right at global systems. So these are not orthogonal binnings, right? There's overlap in these two with the previous two. But we like to think about some of the work we do in the context of the global system in which we sit, issues that connect us together across the globe, like climate change, and how do we do carbon management. And then at the bottom left, what are the new basic tools? What's some basic science we need to understand better if we're going to make progress in all those other areas, right? And that's a place where we certainly need governments involved in funding basic research to provide that basis going forward. And the good news in Paris was that on day one of COP21, Obama announced, you may recall, the Mission Innovation Initiative of the US plus 19 other governments around the world, focused on basic energy science. And we're hoping to get the first 20%. So the idea was these governments all committed to double their basic R&D budgets over the next 5 years. And we're hoping to get the first 20% installment on that in the US in this coming budget cycle. The SEED program, I mentioned briefly already. This slide is just to show a sense of how that cuts across campus. So we've engaged most departments on campus in that. SEED funds are interesting. I said it gets new faculty involved. These SEED projects go lots of different directions after they're done. In some cases, a little bit surprising to us, the SEED fund projects go straight into startup companies. You might think that SEED project, you try out the idea and then you do some applied research for a while if the SEED project looked promising. But a few like fast cap systems, it was a SEED project looking at some new materials for ultracapacitors. Their target was electrifying transportation. They launched right after the SEED project back in 2008. They're a small company in downtown Boston today. Some of these go on to government funding after their SEED work. An example not on here that I'll tell is an example of a SEED project that looked at new grid-scale battery technology. It's a project that Don Sadoway did in materials science, looking at a so-called liquid metal battery technology. It was inspired by aluminum smelters that you find around the world wherever there's big hydropower or geothermal power, so cheap electricity, because they consume lots of electricity. Don was looking to see, could he invent something like that ran both directions, right? So he could suck in a lot of electricity like an aluminum smelter, but he could also put it back out to the grid when you need it. So that was a seed project at Mighty. It then got substantial funding from ARPA-E in the first round of ARPA-E projects, and it got funding from one of Mighty's sponsors for a different application area. So Total was the sponsor at MIT. They had also been part of the seed fund funding that Don got. And then it spun off as a company, as a startup company called Liquid Metal Battery Company. It's now called Ambri. I'm not sure what drove the name change, but Ambri is, you remember that by taking Cambridge and you get rid of the C in the front and some of the back end letters, and you end up with Ambri. And so that's now, and that has Total as an investor amongst others, and is now in pilot manufacturing stage in one of the western suburbs of Boston. Some of these go into more member funding. There's lots of different, Kripa Varanasi is a serial inventor in modified surfaces. Does a lot of work. Maybe his best known work is for ketchup bottles where the ketchup doesn't stick. But he's also done work that's very important in oil gas separations, in de-icing, and so on. So lots of different directions the seed funds have been useful for. So those are specific technology research areas. Just as important are system issues. So one of the really important challenges in energy, particularly as we grow up to look and incorporate more new technologies in our energy system, intermittent renewables, for example, is understanding what the system impacts are of those different technologies and how it impacts with business. What are the business models going forward? So one of the programs we have there is a utility of the future study, which is a consortium activity of 17 sponsors listed up here, ranging from fuel suppliers, for example, Saudi Aramco and Shell, through generators to electricity service providers. Our goal here is to look at what the advent of distributed energy resources on the grid, so storage or distributed generation, new ICT advancements, possible electrification of transportation, all the different things happening in the utility space. What is that going to do to the business models going forward? So we use a lot of modeling capability we have on campus to explore different scenarios for technology penetration, to explore different regulatory scenarios, and to look with sponsors at different business models that might be deployed going forward. That will eventually morph into a electric power systems center at MIT. And lastly, I want to say just a word or two about outreach at Mighty, because I think that's a really important part of what we do as a cross-campus activity. So taking this knowledge we have from the research and education programs and getting that into the public discussion. One of the central activities we do there has been a future of set of studies. These studies are framed in the context of the projected increase in global energy demand going out to mid-century and beyond, coupled with the obvious need to decarbonize the energy system as we get out to mid-century and beyond. So the question we ask is, what are those technologies that are most likely to play a key role in getting us from here to there? Okay? And so we have done studies beginning with a study on the future of nuclear power. We started there because nuclear is the one zero-carbon energy system that we have practiced at scale globally. We did a study on the future of coal, so coal plus CCS, looking at what the opportunities were there. A study on the future of natural gas, focusing on shale gas in particular. A study on geothermal, looking at engineered or enhanced geothermal technologies that are widely available globally. One on the future of the electric grid, and then the most recent study looking at the future of solar energy. So this one we rolled out in May. Like the others, we release these in DC. Our audience is primarily decision makers in the US, which is why we choose there. And then we've had a number of follow-up activities on campus. We tried to get our solar community together, more than 200 people, to think about how we work together on moving solar forward. We also do more focused symposia, much shorter scale. I ought to say these future of studies are typically efforts that involve maybe 20 faculty from departments that are relevant. So in solar, we had faculty from engineering and science departments involved in solar activities. We had faculty from economics, from the Sloan School, faculty experts in policy issues, so that we could cover the gamut of issues there. We worked together for a couple of years on this with maybe a dozen or 20 graduate students who carry the load, as you might know, and have active debates all the way along through the study. And I think that's where the richness of these studies comes from, is having faculty from these different disciplines work together to understand the issues going forward. In these shorter term symposia, we look at a one-day event where we try to get stakeholders together in issues that we think are timely in the public debate and offer a lot of confusion. So we try to just shed light on it by getting these different stakeholders together. First one of these we did was back in the era of the Waxman-Markey bill, if you can remember back that far. There was a lot of discussion in DC, of course, with this cap and trade program about capturing CO2. A question that came up repeatedly was, well, just how are we going to do that? And sort of the glib answer in DC was, well, we'll retrofit all the coal-fired power plants with CCS capability, and that'll take care of it. And so we thought it'd be worth asking the question in this symposium, what fraction of coal-fired power plants could you actually retrofit? I mean, a lot of these are in urban environments. You don't have 7 acres for a chemical plant on the back end to do the capture. You might not have access for a pipeline to get the CO2 to somewhere where you could sequester it. Some of these coal plants are really old and frankly not worth retrofitting for capture. So a lot of issues there, and we thought it's worth taking a quantitative look at that. And so we had this work group, about 70 people together, to look at those issues. Our estimate was about 20-25%. One of the outcomes of that was DOE's launching a careful quantitative assessment looking at all the coal generation in the US and trying to get a better number on that. They came up with 22%, I believe, in the end. But there's a whole host of topics there that I think benefit from our coming together and thinking collectively about what are the challenges and what do we have to do. So last 2 general slides on MIGHTY. One is where are we going now, right? So we've I think one of the biggest things we've done in the first 8-9 years of MIGHTY is to build up a really vibrant ecosystem, energy ecosystem at MIT with literally thousands of people engaged and involved in energy challenges from all over the map. A lot of startup companies. MIT's launched some 40+ startups since MIGHTY got going. How do we focus all of that energy and talent on the big energy challenges going forward? And one of the ways we've decided to do that is by focusing that energy and talent on 8 low-carbon energy centers. And so the 8 that we're standing up now include solar, storage, CCUS, advanced materials for energy, fission, electric power systems, energy bioscience, and then lastly, fusion. I'll come back to that if you want, but I love fusion. So that's the set of what we see as a set of key technology issues that, coupled with policy, that will be important in getting us from here to there over the next 30, 40, 50 years. Those are, for the most part, technology focused. There are clearly system issues that we have to understand better. This utility of the future study is one. It's actually our first venture in looking at one of these industry-centric studies. A second venture there for us is a study we call the mobility of the future study, which looks at the technology side. So what are the fuel and engine combinations that will affect transportation options going forward? What are regulatory scenarios that might exist in the US and other places? And how do we understand consumer choices? So why do consumers choose vehicles that they do? And how's that affected by some of these new technologies coming down the road, such as ride sharing or car sharing or autonomous vehicles? And we think there's a lot of opportunity to bring disciplines together to understand those issues. So that's my sort of quick overview of MIGHTY. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about this example of how we brought different disciplines at MIT together to look at the specific issue of solar energy and our view of what's the future there. So the central issue in storage is that is the big resource that we have for renewables globally. Solar is the most abundant of the renewable energy sources we have on the planet. We've already grown solar globally to about 1% of electricity generation. That's very good, but we have a long way to go if we're going to have solar play a significant role in electricity generation globally by 2050, right? So what will it take to get a factor of 50x build out in solar globally? And that's the framing issue for this study. Just to remind you of things you know about solar, we frame this with the good news that prices for, in particular, photovoltaic modules have decreased very substantially over the last 8 years or so. You can see that in the three lines on the right-hand graph here. The module price has dropped some 85% since 2008. You can see prices for utility scale and residential scale solar installations have also dropped significantly over that period. The bad news in that plot is how parallel those curves are, right? Which tells you that the decrease in the prices of a residential unit or in a utility scale unit are mostly driven by the module decrease, right? So we've got a lot better at module efficiency and manufacturing. That cost is leveling out now. You can take it to zero if you like, and residential and utility scale are still too expensive, right? So what big challenge for us is what do you do about the so-called balance of system costs? So what are all those other costs there, like permitting, like installation cost, and so on? So how do we get that down? Another set of issues that we have to deal with in solar, where regulations are very important, is what will be the stability and long-term role of these different regulatory scenarios that we practice solar in. On the good news side, federal subsidies were extended back in December for another 5 years. Actually, they fade out towards the end of that 5-year period. And there was a lot of worry that we would have a major disruption in the solar industry in the U.S., particularly if those incentives were not extended. It's interesting that at COP21, after the agreement was signed on that second Saturday, the stock price of the largest solar company in the U.S. went up 5%, which was quite good. Later in December, when these tax credit, the investment tax credit was extended, price went up 30%. So intent is good, COP21, but actually having government policy agreed to is even more important. State programs haven't changed very much recently, and in fact there's been a backlash in some areas, Nevada for example, in policies that are being used to incentivize residential installation. So what are our main messages here? So what are the issues we want to address in trying to understand what has to be done in order for us to get this 50-fold build out? The three main messages I'm going to go through here are, first, that the federal solar R&D policy ought to be revised to look more at transformative technologies that have the opportunity to reduce total system cost, right? So what can make not just the module cost, but that whole balance of system cost easier? That's a really important R&D issue, and it's not where we've been focused at the federal level. Second is that both federal and state authorities need to think about how to deal on the policy side and research side to prepare for greater penetration of solar. There's some major issues that are going to impact penetration as we get beyond these couple of percent where we are today. And then lastly, we ought to rethink federal, state, and local support of solar deployment so that we get more solar generation for the tax dollar we spend. So I'll go through those three messages. So message one is on R&D. So how do we focus our R&D to get the most into transformative solar technologies? First observation I make is that the private sector already has incentives to improve and make today's solar technologies more efficient. We have through various incentives built up a thriving solar industry in this country, and they have incentive to invest in improvements in their technology to lower costs. So I would argue that's not the most important place for government to be, but it should be upstream of that. So it should focus primarily on emerging technologies with the potential to do this system-wide transformation. So what does that look like? This is a set of pictures of some of those technologies, an area I would call emerging thin film technologies. So how do you take what we've learned about how to fabricate and coat very thin films with solar active materials? This is an example in the upper left of a light flexible solar film. It's hung off of a thread of human hair to give you a sense of the thickness of it. Okay, so very thin. Just last Friday, we actually announced the lightest and thinnest solar cell ever, solar PV material ever. We show a picture of it floating on top of a soap bubble. So there are a lot of really interesting technologies. The question is, can you scale those up in both efficiency and cost so that they do this job of transforming the system to make it cheaper overall? Some of the new technologies that may help us do that include high throughput printing. So this high throughput printing could, in principle, lower the energy cost of printing or making solar cells, could reduce very substantially the footprint for the manufacturing facilities to do these. So that's a very promising piece of the thin film technology. And on the right is a picture to drive home the point that there are some materials we need to look very carefully at that are very abundant on Earth. So some of the commercial thin films we have today use rare earth materials, tellurium, for example. If you wanted to get this 50x build out in solar at today's production rates of tellurium, you need 1,400 years of production. If you can make better use of sulfur in these solar cells, you need, for 50x build out globally, you need 6 hours of sulfur production. You probably don't need to do that. You can just use stuff that's already lying on piles on the ground. So there are a lot of interesting component areas that impact this. Maybe they're easy to install. Maybe you can roll them out on the ground. This may not be a popular picture. This is the Red Sox ground crew rolling out a tarp. I should have probably picked a different team for this talk. So those are some of the opportunities in photovoltaics. The other solar energy technology that's out there, less used today, is concentrated solar power. A really simple concept, right? You take mirrors and focus sunlight onto some material or fluid to absorb the energy, and you heat it up. So that's going from total incident energy to absorbed heat. You take that heat and then you use it to generate electricity with a thermal electricity generation process, something we're really good at today. And out comes the net electricity. That, unfortunately, is a little bit more expensive than PV today, so it's not used as much, and we have a lot less experience with it. So I think industry is reluctant because there's a lot more capital risk in building these plants. To get in this business is about $1 billion to build a CSP plant. It's got some really interesting advantages, though. One is that between this absorbed heat and electricity generation step, you can very easily take away some of the heated storage fluid and just put it in a tank and let it sit there for a day or two, a couple of days, and then bring it back to make electricity whenever you need it, whether it's that night or the next day. That's a really efficient storage technology. It's 97% efficient, round-trip efficiency. It's really hard to beat with other storage technologies. So this is the dispatchable solar technology for today. By taking advantage of substantial storage, I can go up to capacity factors on the order of 70% with this technology. Another really interesting advantage is that because the turbine systems that are used on this back end are also used in fossil electricity generation, you can very easily hybridize this technology with today's technology, with natural gas generation, for example. So it does offer some interesting migration paths to the future where you might hybridize with gas and over time phase the gas down to zero. So that's another technology that we need to work on to develop better, more efficient systems. Message 2 is that the U.S. federal and state governments need to prepare for greater penetration of solar in the electricity system. So a couple of issues there. One is that we've got decades into the research portfolio for silicon PV. That's likely to be the technology for at least the next decade or two. Very large scale reliance on PV is going to propose system challenges for the grid where economical grid scale storage is going to be essential. Or I add in some of that CSP I showed on the previous slide. And then lastly, reform of electricity pricing is going to be essential to avoid unnecessary political resistance for increased penetration of solar. So let me, with just a couple of slides, illustrate some of those issues. First one looks at, so first two here look at why is storage so important. Both of these look at a world of increasing solar penetration with no storage. So let's assume we haven't figured it out yet. In this one, as we go from left to right, we increase solar penetration, again without storage, and look at what's the value to me as a solar generator, whether I own a utility scale solar plant or I'm a residential solar producer, right? What you see is that the average solar owner price goes down dramatically, and it eventually drives down the average market price as well, for the simple reason that with more and more solar penetration, you have more and more zero-cost marginal electricity going into the market at the same time of day, right? So eventually, that's going to force everybody's price down. All right? So even though we've lowered the price of solar today, that earlier a graph I showed you, you're going to have to make it a lot lower going forward if you want to compete in a market that doesn't have storage in it, okay? Because you don't have any options except to sell it midday. That's one challenge. Second challenge is again, without storage, what do you do for the rest of the day, right? If you look at the left-hand graph, that looks at 12% PV generation. And you can see that as I go from 0 to 12% generation, solar midday shaves off a little bit of the capacity you need from other sources. So the top of the yellow is the total generation demand you need midday. The brown piece of this curve is the non-solar generation that you need. So you can see that if you had no solar, then the whole curve would be brown. Put in 12% solar, and the brown peak drops down 6-7%, something like that. Right? But look, as I go left to right with more and more solar in the system, you'll see that you get more and more solar generation and more electricity provided by solar, but the peak amount of non-solar generation doesn't go down, right? So you have to have the same amount of non-solar generating capacity, you just use it less, right? And that raises interesting questions about who pays for that, right? And I can assure you nobody is stepping forward to pay for that part, least of all the solar generators. So that's an issue. And they both point to the need to really have a sharp focus on storage going forward. The other piece is a very controversial issue, and that is so-called net metering, which has been a very useful and helpful strategy for early adoption of solar, particularly residential scale solar. But it's one that's going to produce a lot of resistance eventually as we increase solar penetration. And so it's going to be an incentive that's going to need to be phased out. And to see the driver for that, if you look at the system, I have a system here with 4 users, 4 residential users. On the left side, before anybody's put solar on their roof, right? And you can see that their solar bill or their utility rate is composed of 2 parts. There's the red part at the bottom, which is the wholesale price for electricity. And then on top of that, there's the retail price, which you pay as a customer, which includes the network costs, so the wires that actually get the electricity to your home. Now we suppose that one of these customers switches over and puts rooftop solar in their home in the presence of net metering. Then you have customer A who's receiving money at the retail rate for the solar energy that they put back into the grid, which means that instead of receiving wholesale, they get retail, which includes the cost of the wires, right? So they're not contributing to that, which means that the non-solar customers have to pay not just retail rate, but they have to pay a little bit extra to cover the wire cost, the distribution cost for the solar customer, right? And that's where the resistance is beginning to come from in a big way. So that's another issue. I think we have to look at policies that are fair in a large-scale solar world. That doesn't matter so much when there's very little solar. Message 3 is that we ought to rethink federal, state, and local support to encourage solar deployment and to get the most solar deployment out of the tax dollars we spend. I think what's essential there, what framed our discussion internally, was our sense that the goal of these policies was to get the most CO2 reduction from our energy system that we could get for the dollar we spend, right? And I appreciate that there are sometimes other goals for subsidizing solar, but that was our goal anyway. And if the goal is getting CO2 out of the energy system, then this is an important issue. The system we use today, and what was renewed in December, is a set of investment tax credits for solar installers. For reasons I don't fully understand, we do it differently for wind. We do production tax credits. In the case of investment tax credits, we subsidize inefficient solar more, right? So we use federal dollars to provide bigger subsidy for areas that have the worst solar resource, right? And that's simply because what I have to invest in a utility scale California solar plant is a lot less for the same amount of solar than it would take me in Massachusetts, which is not a great solar resource, right? So that means I spend fewer federal dollars for the same amount of electricity than I do in Massachusetts. Not a great idea if the goal is more solar for dollars spent. A second inefficiency, which is driven primarily by the fact that most of the incentives locally and most of the carbon policies locally in the U.S. are state level, right? So we have a mix of some 29 renewable portfolio standards and other policies in states like California, which are quite aggressive and important in addressing decarbonizing the energy system. But one of the challenges in these statewide systems is that most, I think all but one of them, require, in order to get credit towards this RPS in Massachusetts, say, or New Jersey, I have to build a solar in Massachusetts or New Jersey, right? It would be much more productive for the country as a whole if you were allowed to build that solar and got credit for it if you put it in California or Arizona or somewhere that actually had a lot of sunshine, right? But that's not allowed for reasons we could discuss. But so we think that it would be a good idea that, given state RPS programs, it'd be better if we had a national RPS program. That's not likely to happen, as you can imagine. But maybe we could at least remove out-of-state restrictions on siting, right? Which would still allow states to dictate what they want for RPSs, but get the most efficient solar for the installations or capacity I put in. So those were the three main messages: the importance of refocusing federal R&D, particularly on transformative technologies in the solar space, not for the next 5 years, but for the long haul to get us to 2050, where developing countries can use solar. A focus on key issues like storage, so that we're ready to have a system with a much larger percents of PV than we have today. And then lastly, better use of our tax dollars to support the build-out of solar. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and be happy to answer questions.
Restriction on one state building in another state, are those all state laws, or is that a federal law that?
No, that's so the RPSs are state regulations.
So every state put that law in effect and
yeah,
said you cannot build in our state unless you're.
No. So you don't get credit. So they've told the electricity suppliers that you have to get some percentage of your generation from renewable energy resources, sometimes specified by type, like solar or wind. And in order to get credit for that, you actually have to be supplying that from the state. So for Massachusetts companies to get credit for the solar, they need to do, the solar has to be built.
I don't understand why they wouldn't, like if I were Nevada, why I wouldn't want to rent out space and lease land.
You would if you were Nevada, but you wouldn't if you were Massachusetts. If one of the goals is jobs creation, Massachusetts doesn't allow that. Exactly. Yeah. Strangely, we do it for wind, but not anyway.
Hello. it seems like a very fast-moving industry and technology. What's been the biggest development in solar since this report came out last May?
Good question. So there, I mean, as you said, it's a fast-moving target. So among the many things that have happened, Sun Power announced an improved efficiency on silicon-based systems. They have up to about 21.5%, if I recall right. That sort of system change makes installation cheaper. You need less PV. That sort of change is very important. In another area, in emerging thin films, perovskites, there's a particular solar material called perovskites. We only started doing serious solar research on perovskites 5 years ago. It took 30 years for silicon solar to go from very low efficiencies up to the 21, 22% of today. Perovskites got from a couple of percent up to 20+% in 5 years. So it's really exciting and really encouraging about what you can do. But there are some big challenges with materials like perovskites. They are not stable, environmentally stable, so they degrade performance very quickly, hours after you start to use them. So there's a lot of promise there, a lot of exciting developments, and at the same time, a lot of challenges to be dealt with.
Currently, solar energy is subsidized by government, right? And is it any foreseeable future we can see that solar energy could become a viable industry without government subsidy, the incentive type of things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's completely the goal, right? Is to drive solar costs down, which will likely require new technologies plus storage to go with it, so that it can be competitive in the marketplace on its own. There are already areas, regions, where that's true, right? So there can be special regions where the competition is very expensive. We find this in India, for example, where we work in remote areas and the competition is trucked-in diesel. Solar can be quite competitive, in fact, much better. But the system demands are quite different there, right? A residential load in a rural village in India could be a couple of watts, right? So very small. It happens in the U.S. in a state like Hawaii, where again the transportation of the fuel is quite expensive. Solar can be quite competitive, primarily while penetration is still modest, right? I think one of the challenges we're dealing with in Hawaii is how do we deal with intermittency issues when the penetration gets up to very large levels, which it could do in Hawaii. Southern California's experienced that. San Diego has that problem right now as well.
Thank you.
My laptop runs on DC, my cell phone runs on DC, my electric car runs on DC. Is there any effort looking at maybe trying to convert us back to DC energy instead of AC?
Yep, there's a lot of work in the power electronics community working on that. There's a lot of work going on here at IIT looking at those technologies and how could you avoid the transfer from DC to AC and then back again. Data centers are great examples. With computers, you have to get a different supplier for your computer because you don't want a power supply in it, right? It's doing the conversion for you. But there's a great opportunity there, particularly as homes use more LED lighting as opposed to the incandescent lights we have now. It's not clear how that transition works, but we have to figure out how to move from a system that's all AC to one that increasingly is dependent on DC and in homes, a lot of low voltage DC.
So clearly, PV materials seems to be critically important, and they will have a key roles to play to harness really the solar energy. What have we learned actually over the last several years? Obviously, tellurium and sulfur are not going to cut. Not that tellurium is less promising, but They are not much of the tellurium, and it is very toxic. So what kind of materials you would predict that the community should be looking at, which is sustainable?
Okay. So let me frame the answer. I'll go back in history a little bit more and say that materials have always been, I think, a key challenge in the energy business. So this is my second energy crisis that I've lived through. Back in the 70s, we had very constrained oil imports, and that produced a lot of research looking at how do we meet those energy demands without so much dependence on imported oil. We weren't able to develop a lot of the technologies then because of materials issues. And I think one of the reasons for optimism today is that a big difference over those 20-something years is that in the meanwhile, we developed computational material science. We developed molecular biology, so we can use biology as a tool for rapid screening of new materials for energy applications. We understand a lot more about, say, corrosion processes based on fundamental materials chemistry at the surface of these materials. We can do multi-layer materials we couldn't do before. So lots of opportunities there that I think enable us to look at these new materials. Sulfur, I would disagree that sulfur is not something you would use going forward. I think we have actually a new battery technology coming out of one of our faculty members' labs, which is based in large part on sulfur. I don't know, you may know a target for electrochemical storage today is about $100 a kilowatt hour for batteries. That's one of the goals. He thinks he can hit 50 cents a kilowatt hour, factor 200, right? So that would be a game changer, right? And in part it's because it's really cheap materials to go in. You have to do it and manufacture it cheaply. That's Professor Yetming Chang at MIT. But that's where materials design and opportunities, I think, interface with the energy system, and there are chances for these big breakthroughs going forward.
You are looking at the very large surface area in the world painted with sulfur. Imagine a scenario when there is a fire, lots of sulfur dioxides, and here comes the gas station with the water. You make lots of sulfuric acid. What do you do with that? That's the thing. I mean, that's the bigger thing.
Okay, so part of every one of these technologies is an understanding of the life cycle analysis, right? So I think you do that on any of these technologies. An example is perovskites, where the best perovskite technology today use a lead component, it's a lead sulfide component. So the question is, so with an element like that, the basic question, what is the availability of that material in the environment? Not how much of it is there, but what form is it in? And so I think in perovskites, we are thinking very carefully about that availability issue, as well as what's the element that goes into it. So it's an important point, but yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make a point, excuse me. The perovskite, I think agree that this is a good area. But again, what I'm saying is there is something missing in the education system itself, that what to use and what not to use. So perovskite, the lead-based perovskite is completely misguided. Lead has to be eliminated from the picture itself. That's the point actually that I'm trying to make. That similarly tellurium, people spend so much of time on tellurium. It is complete, from my perspective, just an academic exercise, but practicality.
Well, it is not an academic exercise. So First Solar, the largest, I think they're the largest commercial thin film producer, right? They have done amazing things with CadTel cells, and has been a big part of the solar build-out, not just in this country, but around the world. Will that be the solar material for the long-term future? We can argue about that. I can argue with First Solar. But I think you can't deny it's a big piece of the system we have now and the growing solar capacity we have on Earth. And I think it will continue to be for the next 10, 20 years, right?
One of the very quick question, yeah. One of the messages I think that you were trying to give us is the importance of storage coupling with the solar activity. And I was waiting to see how the results would change when you add the storage. I assume that dusk and early evening peak could be suppressed a lot by adding a storage technology. So is that what you're seeing in your results? And what would be the best storage technology to match or to add to solar?
The best storage technology would be the one that met the technical requirements the cheapest way possible. How's that? So, which is to say, I don't know. Keep in mind, there are a lot of different storage requirements you need to make. So there's the microsecond or sub-second scale for voltage regulation, frequency regulation. We know how to do that, I think. There's the day-night storage you need to do. I think we have the right ideas to do that. We need to make it cheaper. And then there's seasonal storage, right? So how do I get from summer to winter with solar, for example? And I don't think we know how to do that. I think we have some ideas, and those are in the research labs now. But I think it's an exciting area, right? And it'd be interesting to see. But I think you could do, the curves I showed were 24-hour curves, right? I think we have good ideas how to do that. No. I could do it tomorrow with CSP, for example, but not in Massachusetts.
So just to change gears a little bit, so the Huffington Post reported on an unnamed lobbying effort by the Koch brothers, $10 million effort to kill solar energy. And then there's talk about obstructionist Congress trying to renege on COP21. So what are your feelings about the political climate, and are these just the death throes of dinosaurs of fossil fuels? Pun intended.
That's there is indeed. All three of the four Koch brothers were graduates of chemical engineering at MIT. And they're really smart people, actually. So the glib answer is that the political climate will be challenging going forward. The good news is that I think there are places we can work together to move forward. I don't think this has ever been a monotone, improving system. There looks more like the S&P 500. So we're getting better over time, but there's a lot of up and down in getting there. I think everybody in the room probably wishes that we could just all get on board and move smoothly ahead. Here's an example of how I think we can work together. I mentioned this mission innovation commitment that Obama and 19 government partners around the world made at COP21. That's a focus on basic research in energy. It is absolutely critical because it is an area of the energy value chain where industry typically is not focused because it's too far away from return on investment, right? So it's very difficult for them to go there. But it's absolutely vital to do that kind of work if you want to be ready down the road with the new ideas that can make a shale gas feasible. So all the work that went into 3D imaging, directional drilling, fracking technology, understanding rock mechanics. So that kind of basic research is absolutely vital. That's an area where there's really good bipartisan agreement in Congress, right? So let's work there. Let's do something really good for the country and get these other countries around the world doing the same thing. So I think there is an opportunity to work there. And I think we ought to focus on common ground. It's easy these days to fall in the trap of just finding all the differences. There are a few differences out there, as you might have noticed.
A quick question. So, you talked about solar energy and the fluctuation during the daily power load, but the more important problem is actually fluctuations on a longer time scale. You have a hurricane, you have 3 days of no solar power, energy storage is really not possible over an extended period of time. So I was wondering why you did not consider wind plus solar, because the fluctuation levels for wind plus solar is a lot tighter than just solar. So one of the developments could be on quiet wind power, so that you can actually put it in your backyard and it's not a disturbance. So is MIT going to consider that at all?
Yeah, so integration, an important aspect of this is the system, right? So what does the energy system look like, including the electricity power system? So I think it's really important to consider all of those resources and how they work together, and what kind of firming capacity do you need in worst case scenarios for that whole system. I mean, one of the things we've become very accustomed in this country to flipping the light switch and the power comes on, whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing or not, right? Even if the sun hadn't been out for a month, right? You still get power. So how do you get a system in 2050 that is very low carbon, but at the same time is reliable, right? And I think a challenge there is going to be what's the long-term storage solution that we develop, whether it's solar fuels or something else, is to be seen. But really important problem.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much.